Record. All right. So thanks a lot for joining us again, joining me again on this for another leadership lesson. We're going to talk about building trust today. So let me go ahead and start by sharing my screen with that. And we'll just go ahead. You guys can see this, right? Let me do that. And actually, I want to go. I don't know why it. There we go. Let's start there. So we're going to start talking about building trust. And you guys kind of got a little bit of this when I was talking a minute ago about resources. I want you to know that I'm not making this stuff up off the top of my head. And you're going to see this as we go through the slides. I put resources in there. And then the last slide on this is going to be like a full list of all of the resources that I used. So you can go back and you can check me. When it comes to trust, if you go to any kind of library, any library source, and you just put trust in the search engine, you're going to come up with millions of responses or millions of sources on that. And so, you know, I'm only going to post a few of them. There may be somebody that has a different opinion or a different research on the subject that might be contradictory to some of the things that I've posted. And if you find that, please let me know, because I want to check it out and I want to learn too. I may not change my mind, but at least I'll see where someone else's perspective on it. Okay. So our objectives today, we're going to define trust. We're going to talk about techniques for building trust, and that includes being transparent, taking responsibility, making failures okay. That's a tough one sometimes. And rebuilding broken trust. And when I talk about that, there's two angles to it. So it can be trust that you have broken, because we're all fallible, we're all going to make mistakes and do dumb things. Or it can be some trust that somebody has broken with you, whether it's a peer, one of your bosses, maybe it's somebody that you're romantically involved in, a friend, whatever. What happens when that trust gets broken? So how do we do that? We do that through humility, and that one might look familiar to some of you. Forgiveness. When we talk about forgiveness, I'm not necessarily talking about something in the spiritual sense, which it can be, but I'm also talking about a mindset and pacing. How quickly are we going to either rebuild trust with somebody that broke with us, or rebuild trust that we have broken? So the pacing, how long does that take? So let me do, before we go on to this, let me share one other thing here. Where did this go? Yeah. Share the sound. Where did this go? Ah, there it is.
How do you establish trust when building relationships?
Trust is the result of something. You can't tell people, trust me. Trust cannot be formed overnight, just as you can't go on one date and decide if you want to marry someone. I mean, it doesn't, you might have lust, but there's no real trust. The best definition of love I ever heard is that you can give someone the power to destroy you and trust that they won't use it. And that's kind of what trust is. It's this deep love, and it comes over time, and it comes from taking lots of little risks. Exposing yourself to more danger, making yourself feel more vulnerable, sharing something personal, putting yourself in a position where you have to turn your back and hope somebody won't stab you or steal your stuff. I mean, this is what trust is. It is the result of you making someone feel safe and them making you feel safe. And it's that dance, and that's what it can't be one-sided, you know. And it's like dating. It's like getting to know someone. It's like making friends. It does not happen overnight, and it's a dance of give and take, give and take, give and take, give and take. And when you feel that person will make you feel safe, trust will emerge. It's not an app. It's not a switch. It's not something you turn on. It's something that evolves. You start to feel it, and then one morning you wake up and you're like, oh my god, I totally trust that person. You're not sure exactly what happened to get you there, but you found yourself there.
Okay. Oops. All right. So let's talk about trust. And which screen am I sharing here? There we go. So we'll define it. Maybe if, there we go. There's a definition. Psychological state comprising willingness to accept vulnerability based on positive expectations of a specific other or others. And that's exactly what Simon Sinek was saying. It's a willingness to accept vulnerability. And we see that it's similarities with safety or love. All of us in the military are in some sort of subordinate position. And we're already in that position of vulnerability. At a bare minimum, we really expect to be treated with dignity and respect, right? I mean, I think that's a baseline level of expectation from anyone in any kind of subordinate position. But if you are a supervisor, if you are in a supervisory position, you have the ability to create a hostile or abusive working environment. You have the ability to influence someone's promotion. You have the ability to influence whether or not their request for a Liberty Day or a weekend or leave gets approved or denied. And in some cases, especially, when the higher you go in the organization, you can have the influence to fire someone. That's a lot of power. The other side of it is, if you are in a supervisory position, you can also encourage creativity and innovation. You can recognize a person's achievements or contributions, because even if you're, if you're, even those of you who are third-class petty officers, if you are in charge of a shop, some third class, I think I have Petty Officer Karcher, who's in charge of the transportation right now. So he has positional authority to assign duty drivers to second, even first class petty officers. He can recognize someone's achievements by writing a positive counseling on them. And so also, if you're a unit leader or a chief, or in my position, you can promote or provide flexible work schedules to help promote work-life balances. So those are kind of the two sides of the power basis that we have as leaders. And like Simon was saying, that trust is not something that exists in one act. It's not like communication or empathy. Empathy and communication, they exist kind of in individual acts. If you come into my office and you tell me that your dog is sick, I can say, oh, wow, that's tough. That's a tough thing to handle sometimes. That's an instance of empathy. But that doesn't mean that you're going to trust me in that moment, because maybe some other things that I've said or done don't earn the trust, right? So it takes a lot of time to build. Now, let me see here, where are we at? When you are, being in the military, I think sometimes our positions we tend to think that just because we have a certain position, we're trustworthy. As a first class petty officer, you have positional authority over people. So you think, okay, well, because I have this authority, they're going to trust me to make the right decision. Because I'm the bandmaster, you're going to trust me to do the right thing. And I don't know that that's necessarily the right approach to take as a leader. I don't get to decide whether or not I'm trustworthy. I don't get to decide whether or not I'm a good leader. I don't even get to decide whether or not I'm a good person. I can make the efforts in those directions, but the people that are around me, the people who are the recipients of my leadership or my efforts to be trustworthy, they are the ones who decide whether or not I'm a good leader, or I'm a good person, or I'm trustworthy, right? So how do we do this? Well, let's talk about transparency first. You have to be authentic. It starts with that person in the mirror. Authenticity is our most significant tool for leveraging commitment. It's how we build relationships of trust with those around us. And it helps us get that that leverage. I mean, leverage is maybe not a great word. That sounds a lot like manipulation. But it's how we get people on our team. So the next one, it kind of goes, authenticity goes hand in hand with integrity. And it's how once we have trust, integrity is how we maintain it. And it requires us to be open and honest. We're gonna do what we say we're gonna do. Now here's the problem with that, especially again as a leader. Let's say I say, hey, great news. We got a 3-day weekend coming up. Let's enjoy it. Let's enjoy this 3-day weekend. And then an hour later, I get a phone call about a change of command ceremony on Saturday, and I try to shut it off as best I can. Hey, look, my team's been working really hard. They've really earned this weekend off, and this is kind of a last minute thing. My sailors have already made plans with their families. At some point, my pushback is gonna fail, maybe, and I get told, no, this is something that you need to do. So after I've already told you can have the weekend off and you've made those plans with your families, then I call you up and say, sorry, but this is something that we've got to do. Have I eroded your trust? Especially for those of you who are fairly junior, who maybe this is your first band. Maybe I've eroded your trust because I said you were going to have the weekend off, and then an hour later I said I didn't. You're not having the weekend off. Those of you who've been around for a while will probably go, yeah, this happens sometimes. I get it. It sucks, but we'll get compensated for it, right? So sometimes keeping your word is a big thing. Whether you're keeping your word between your peers, your bosses, and your teammates. All right, so let's talk a little bit about ownership. And some of you have heard me talk about ownership a little bit before, but I want to illustrate it with a kind of something outside the military, a story outside the military. So in 2015, Volkswagen came under fire because they had installed software in some of their vehicles, and this software detected when it was under an emissions test, and it covered the diesel emissions from the vehicles. And in the United States, this device or this software was found in 482,000 vehicles, and then worldwide over 11 million. So the CEO, Michael Horn, was called to testify before Congress. And what did he say? He said, I didn't know this was happening. Wait a minute. So you have no idea why you're sitting in front of Congress? No one told you this? You didn't know why you've been called to testify before Congress? I'm gonna wave the BS flag on that one a little bit. At the very least, he should have said, "Hey, yeah, I just found out about this, and I'm really sorry that this happened, and I didn't know that it was happening when it was, when it was happening, but this is what we are doing to resolve it. We've issued a recall for all the vehicles so we can remove that software. We're uh, implementing these oversight these kind of oversight conditions so that this doesn't happen in the future, or whatever. He didn't own responsibility for what was happening in his own company. So what do you think that did to the trust of the customers, of the government? It's bad news. Reporting bad news is probably the most important part, most vital part of leadership. You've got to be willing to take some risks. You've got to be willing to take ownership of it. And when I became a unit leader, and I think some of you may have heard this phrase before: "What happens on the road stays on the road." When I became a unit leader, the bandmaster flat out said, "That does not exist. You need to beat the bad news home, because I would much rather hear bad news from you as a unit leader than from the admiral, than from the sponsor, than from, the news." If you as a unit leader wait to tell me that something bad happened, and I find out about it from someone else, one, it's going to look like I don't know what's going on in my own unit, because there's the truth there. But what's that going to do to my trust of you as a unit leader? Going to be bad. But you have to be willing to accept that responsibility. And here's the other thing about trust. Sometimes you're going to be put in a position where you have to tell someone something that they don't want to hear. So maybe you're going to have to tell your chief or the LPO or your unit leader something that maybe they don't really want to hear, and that's going to be risky for you, especially in a subordinate position. But you have to be willing to do that, maybe to build trust among your team members and even your leaders. All right. So before I go on to the next part, does anybody have any comment on that? Because this is a big one. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to take ownership for something that maybe you weren't responsible for. You weren't directly responsible for something that happened on the road, but because you're the unit leader, it's your responsibility to report it.
I just think it's so nice to be part of a command where it's safe to do this. And I think you'll get into it later, but if the mistake was my own, it's safe to take ownership of that here and move forward. Maybe be counseled and learn from it, but to move forward. And it's a safe environment to report bad news as a unit leader, for example. So I know that's not always been my experience, and so I'm really grateful for the leadership that enables this. And I think even as unit leaders, we can be leaders that enable the members of our group to come to us with bad news too. I think that's just so refreshing.
Well, I appreciate that, Kristen, but you got to realize that that may not always be the case. Um, if you're planning on staying in the Navy, or even if you get out and you go to work in another organization, you've got to be prepared to deal with the possibility that taking responsibility, even for someone else's actions, might not be met positively, and you are going to be taking risks. For those of us that have been around for a while, I can tell the difference between you taking responsibility for something that happened on the road, for something that someone else did, and you taking responsibility for something that you are ultimately responsible for. So if the the brass quintet's on the road and maybe one of the members of the quintet gets drunk, or maybe one of the members says something really disrespectful to the sponsor, and you come to me and you say, I'm really sorry that I didn't establish my expectations for how people behave on this when we're on the road. I didn't establish that, and I didn't emphasize the importance of staying in control or speaking to people with respect and dignity. And I'm going to own that. I know the difference between that person being a moron and you taking responsibility, right? And if someone's going to get written up or go to mast or whatever, it's not going to be the person saying, I should have established this environment. It's going to be the person who committed the offense. Now, if it's a pattern of behavior where, of you not establishing an environment that that promotes respect and control and that kind of thing, then we might have to have a different conversation. But again, I know the difference between you taking responsibility for your actions and you taking responsibility for the actions of your shop, your department, your unit, whatever. Right? And that's something that you'll have to learn as you go. But hopefully these trainings and these things that we're talking about will help you learn those things faster rather than through mistakes like I did. All right, so let's go on. So Kristen mentioned this a little bit. We've got to make failure, I don't want to say we want to make failure okay, but we've got to be able to create a safe environment where when failure happens, we can learn from it. So the first couple of examples that I want to give you, Thomas Edison worked on 3,000 different theories for developing the incandescent lamp. So that's 3,000 theories that did not produce a light bulb. And maybe you've heard me mention the idea about photographers. They'll take hundreds of pictures of a single object before they find the one that they're going to publish or reproduce. And as musicians, we might take dozens of auditions before we win the one that's going to get us into the symphony orchestra or a military band. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do all of those times when the effort didn't produce the desired result, are those times failures? Or are they opportunities to learn and grow and figure out what didn't work and figure out what we need to do in the future so that it will? One of the primary conditions that we have to meet as leaders for any organization is we have to have an environment of safety in order for creativity to happen. When we don't accept anything less than failure, when we have a zero tolerance policy, we're only going to discourage people from trying new things. Now, there are people who are going to say that they don't have a zero tolerance policy, but when something gets screwed up, It certainly feels like it. So, they're gonna, so I've worked for bosses who will yell and who will write people up at a moment's notice for the least little thing. And so it creates more of a fear environment than a safe environment. And you're only going to do as much as you can to stay under the radar and not make any waves, not make any mistakes. So the thing that we have to think about, though, is that failure is not necessarily an indication of poor performance. When we channel certain failures properly, we can learn from those mistakes, and they can be a catalyst for new ideas. When in your units, as a unit leader, try to think about promoting an environment of failing forward or failing smart. Okay, failing smart means that you're allowing people to take risks and learn from setbacks. Failing forward means that you're going to take those lessons from that failure and you're going to apply them to the next move. Okay, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? It didn't work because of this. Okay, so let's try something different and keep moving forward. When your folks make mistakes, and I'm just going to use fail as a general term, but it can be anything from something happening in the fiscal shop to something happening on a gig or in a rehearsal or whatever. Why did it fail? Is it because the person is incompetent? Is it because we set our expectations too high? Maybe as a unit leader, you programmed a piece of music that was kind of beyond the reach of your team, and it was difficult. You wanted to challenge them with a very difficult piece, but they just couldn't pull it off. Is it because they're incompetent? Is it because you need more training, maybe more rehearsal time, more mentorship? Or is there something going on in that person's life where they're distracted by what you're trying to accomplish in the unit? Or they just have too much on their plate. I was telling one person the other day that when I was a first class, and in Newport, I was running band operations as a first class. I was also running the brass quintet. I was also the command DAPA and the command Simeo and the librarian. I wasn't doing anything really well. I was making a lot of mistakes, but I was doing a lot. And it was overwhelming. So, what's going on with your people? Are they making mistakes because they just can't devote the mental power to the one thing that's in front of them? Think about that. Was it because they're trying to do something, they're trying to make things better, and it just didn't work? All right, why not? And the more that we kind of dig in, the more we kind of try to figure out what went wrong and why, and what do we do to make it better, the more people are going to feel safe at trying new things. And the more people are going to want to do the right thing, not because you're coercing them to do it, but because they want to do well for you. They want to see you as a leader succeed. And the way to do that is to make sure that the team succeeds, and they're going to try harder. So trust is the key factor in successful innovation. The only way we're going to be creative is if we make failure okay. A few years ago, and you guys have heard me recommend David Marquet's books a lot, and I was working with a couple of folks in his office on some ideas about creativity and innovation, and the his office assistant came up with this meme. So the one time when the something that I said ends up in a meme, it actually ends up not being a bad thing. Everything that we consider to be traditional, whatever we think of as traditional or standard practice or SOP, at one time, it was new. It was creative. It was something out of the box that no one else ever did, right? You can't take the wind section out of an orchestra and make it its own ensemble. That's new. No one's ever done that before. Why would you take a Beethoven's Eroica or Egmont or something like that was written for an orchestra and write it just for the wind section of that orchestra? That's insane. No one would think about that. But everything that's now traditional was at one time innovative. And here's the thing, one of the things that I don't like, and I know it's kind of standard language in industries and in military, but standard operating procedure, best practices, industry standard. I hate that. And the reason why I hate it is because it's an excuse to keep doing things the way we've always done them. This is the industry standard. Well, if it's the industry standard, then we have no reason to try to make it better because that's what everybody else is doing. Anyway, okay, I'm getting off my soapbox now. All right, so let's talk about rebuilding broken trust, because that's going to happen. Either you're going to break someone's trust or someone is going to break yours. It's inevitable. We're humans. All right, so the first thing that we have to think about is humility. If building trust takes time and patience, rebuilding it from broken trust is going to require even more. And here's the thing, and I'll disclose a little bit. My wife's first marriage, it ended because of broken trust on a lot of levels, but particularly because of infidelity. And so when we first started dating, and even in the first few years of our marriage, trust was a problem because of what had happened to her before. I didn't do anything to break the trust, but a lot of times I felt like I was the one that was paying for it. And so it took a long time. It took a lot of patience and consistent outward demonstrations of faithfulness before we came to a place of full trust. So if you were the one who broke the trust, it can be difficult as well. The first thing you have to realize is your own part. And that's where the humility comes in. You have to be aware of where you're strong and where you're weak. And this is some self-disclosure, some self-awareness here, right? Keeping your talents and accomplishments in perspective. You may be very, very good at certain things, but you may not be very good at other things. Or there might be someone who's even better. And you have to be able to admit when you made a mistake. That's really the essence of humility. A lot of people look at humility as a weakness, but it's really about your desire to grow and get better. And the thing that let me talk about what humility isn't. It's not, you hanging your head down low and this attitude of self-flagellation. Oh, I suck. That's not it. It's an awareness, right? That you have room to grow. We talked about this. I'm not gonna get too deep into this because we talked about it a lot last time. But empathic or empathetic listening, and it's about validating the other person's feelings. It's not about agreeing with the other person, but it's about understanding that they feel a certain way for a certain reason. Okay. This next one, it's a really tough one for me because y'all know how much I like to talk. But be quick to listen and maybe not as quick to speak. You have to remember that, especially when you're in a leadership position, those of you who are unit leaders, if you are going to be, especially if you're upwardly mobile, you're looking at chief, you're wanting to put in an LDO package or whatever, you got to remember that when you are in a leadership position, you do not have an opinion. You have a policy. As the lieutenant in this organization, every single one of you swore an oath to obey my orders. So if I casually say, man, I really think we should do this, somebody is going to take that for action. And that actually happened to me a couple of times in previous, in previous commands, where the boss would say, I think it would be a good idea if we did X, Y, Z. And being a good sailor, aye, sir, and I carried it out. And he's like, wait a minute, who told you to do this? You did, sir. I didn't tell anyone to do this. I didn't direct anyone. Well, we were having this conversation and you said, I think it would be a good idea if. You don't get to have opinions. You don't get to have, if you say you have a good idea, somebody's going to take it for action. Unless you actually spell it out, what you want done. So as a unit leader or a leader in any capacity, the next time you have a project to do, and you want to sit down with your team and you want to get some ideas on how to get the project done, practice keeping your mouth shut. Practice not saying anything until everyone else's idea is on the table. Because as a leader, you might inadvertently squelch someone else's idea, which might be better if you say, well, here's what I think, but I'm interested in hearing what all of you think. And depending on the level of trust that you have with them, they might go, oh yeah, boss, that's a great idea. And then there's no one else has spoken because you've already put your thought on the table. Get everyone else's thoughts on it first, and then put your thoughts on the table. Okay, so we're going to continue this here. When someone has broken your trust, you got to have a conversation about it. You can't just in some cases, maybe it's okay to let it go, but it's not going to get better. Sometimes you're just going to have that conversation. Use these I feel statements. Have you ever heard of these I feel statements? Instead of saying, you did this thing, say, I felt angry when you said this thing that when you told someone something I told you in confidence. I felt betrayed when you said this thing that I told you in confidence. I was angry when, hey, Lieutenant, I was a little angry when you gave MU2 so-and-so that unit, when you told me that I was going to get it. Or I felt disappointed that you took the car without asking and then brought it back with an empty gas tank, right? I mean, it can have any application to whether it's to your kids or to a friend or to a colleague. Using those I feel statements puts things back on you, and it allows the other person to either validate your feelings and to say, I didn't realize that it would have that impact on you, the thing that I said or did. Did the other person validate your feelings? Was there a good reason for it? Yeah, I know I promised that unit to you, but we've got this other person coming in who has the unit leader course, and I have, an obligation to allow them to use that training that they just had, and you haven't had that training yet. So this is why I have to give that, or this is why I don't have to, but this is why I'm giving that person that unit, so that they can use that training that, other people or use that training that they just came through. Maybe there's another reason. Maybe there's something else going on. So, are you validating the feelings? I understand that you felt betrayed because I told you one thing, and then did another, but this is the reason why I had to do it. Do you feel that the apology was sincere, or am I just saying, hey, sorry, to get you off my back? And if the other person does something where they need to be held accountable, is that person accepting of the consequences? Hey, you got a DUI, and I've got to take you to mast. Well, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to, refuse the mast and request trial by court martial or whatever. Good luck, shipmate. Right? I mean, so are you going, again, there's that ownership, that responsibility. Are you going to own the thing that you said? If you betrayed someone's confidence, are you going to say, I'm really sorry. I didn't even realize what I was saying when I said it, and I'm sorry. And I don't blame you if you don't trust me. Okay, that sound to me anyway. That was something that would sound sincere. Time will tell. Forgiveness. So here's the thing about forgiveness. Forgiveness does not equal restored trust. Let me say that again. Forgiveness does not equal restored trust. You borrow my car, you wreck my car, I'm going to say, you know what? I forgive you. That's, I'll take care of the damages or whatever. You're going to pay me for the damages. We can still be friends. I'm not going to be angry with you anymore. I'm not angry. I'm not mad. But I'm probably not going to let you borrow my car again. Or at least not for a while. Now, if you are, the offended person is the one who determines the pace of rebuilding the trust. You get to decide how much and how soon you're going to allow that trust to be rebuilt. You can take a hard line and say, I'm never going to trust that person again. Or you can take a piecemeal kind of approach. Somebody totally bombs a project or does something that, submits something up the chain of command that was just really bad. I had a sailor a couple of years ago that totally breached the chain of command and sent a form that needed to be signed by the chief of staff directly to the chief of staff, and completely bypassed me on it. And then there were some protocols that person didn't follow as well. And so I had to have an uncomfortable conversation with my chief of staff. And then I had a conversation with that sailor too about, hey, look, this was bad juju. We have a chain of command for a reason. And so I had that person's supervisor kind of provide some mentorship and request that everything, especially if anything's going to go outside the building, go through that person's supervisor, or at least have that person's supervisor copied on the email. And so a short time later, the sailor did it again, not to the chief of staff, but to someone else. And so I finally was just like, look, this person doesn't get to send emails outside the building anymore. Anything that needs to go outside the building goes through the chief. Send it to the chief will decide what to do with it. But, you know, two times in probably about as many weeks. Yeah, no, I can't have this person doing that. And it's bad enough that he made people irritated people in the building, but you know, when we go outside the building, now we've got bigger problems. So those are, we get to decide the pace at which that person rebuilds the trust. Okay. And so it took a little bit of time and some direct mentorship before that sailor was able to, you know, regain the trust of his chain of command. So, all right. So we talked about building trust, rebuilding trust, transparency, and just being real, being true to yourself, and not trying to put on a show or a front to the people around you. Owning responsibility of what goes on in your unit, goes on around you, and then just taking responsibility for it. And then creating an environment of safety where people can make some mistakes, as long, you know, if the mistakes are made out of malice or negligence, that's a different story. And those are disciplinary issues. What we're talking about are people who genuinely want to make the organization better, but you know, either just made some honest mistakes, or maybe they didn't have enough training, maybe there was just some protocols that they weren't aware of, or whatever. You know, people who genuinely want to do the right thing. Malice and negligence are a completely different story, and those are dealt with from a disciplinary aspect. All right, and then we talk about rebuilding trust, having humility, forgiveness, listening, empathic listening, empathetic listening. Okay, so on that note, does anybody have any questions?
I do, sir.
Discussion?
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
It goes back a little bit to the beginning of the presentation. It's more, the question is aimed at practical application for sailors in the musician, well, all sailors. But earlier on, you said, you know, rightly so, that trust is built over time. So given our situation in rotating, I've noticed I've been in just over 8 years, and I've transferred 2 or 3 times to different commands. And on a personal level, felt that from the member's standpoint who's transferred, that it can be hard to trust right away. And sometimes you're asked to trust, whether someone's asking you maybe personal intentions, show me what you want, tell me what you want. And it can be hard to trust when you don't know somebody. And so there's a conflict there. So really, I guess, you know, given what we've talked about through the whole presentation, or what you've talked about, sir, is, you know, kind of aimed at the perspective of the leader. So my question is, could you offer any advice to members who have to transfer and are being asked to trust without that time element? And also, do you have advice for the leader who, because members are transferring, are constantly building trust with someone new all the time?
I think from my perspective, I always kind of take the approach of someone has to trust first. Usually it's the leader, because I can't be on every gig. I can't run the brass quintet and the woodwind quintet and the rock band and so all of these things, you kind of wrap it up as the lieutenant. I have to be able to look at someone who is coming in as, say, a first class petty officer and go, okay, first class, been in 3 bands, been through some advanced training. I know from, by looking at your evaluations that you've done, maybe you've done a couple of deployments. This person has some experience. So there's a certain amount of trust that I can put onto a person that is coming in with that experience. If it's someone like Petty Officer Wang, who's just coming out of the School of Music, I know from my conversations with him that he's got, advanced degrees. I know he's been through the School of Music. And especially having been through the School of Music in all of its iterations, having been an instructor and the training officer, I kind of have an idea of what his abilities are based on the training he's had. So these are the things that I'm going to trust him with. So there are certain things that as a leader, you intuitively know about a person, but then here's the thing is none of you guys who are coming in, I don't know anything about your moral character. The only thing I know is that you've been through boot camp and have had these things trained to you and you know the expectations, but I also know that people are people. Until you give me a reason to not trust you, I think I'm gonna give it a shot and see what happens, right? For you, as someone who's coming in, MU1 Schulte, for example, you know what you've done, you know what your experiences are, you know what your abilities are, you know what your weaknesses are. So you don't know me from anybody. Maybe you know some rumors about me from other people that have worked with me. Some of those rumors might be true, they might not be true, but you're gonna go, oh, okay, I'll give this a shot. And for me, I typically just allow people to tell me what they want to tell me. And I'm not gonna pry. I just don't. Some of your bosses might, some of your chiefs and master chiefs might try to peel that onion back a little bit. I'm just gonna let it peel as it's going to. And then when you're ready, you'll let me know what it is. You'll display a little bit more vulnerability. I guess you just have to live and learn. The one thing that I would encourage you or discourage you from anyway is don't harden yourself too much from broken trust. When somebody in a leadership position or even a junior position breaks your trust, be cautious going forward, but don't get hard about it. I had a master chief who at one time he was just like, no, you can't let him do this. You can't let him do this because if one person does, then they're all going to do this, and it's just going to be mass chaos and blah 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 blah. And in my mind, I'm going, man, what happened to you in your career? Who screwed you over that bad? And maybe I would be that way too if somebody had screwed me over that bad. I don't know. I don't know what happened that made this person that way, but and I think there have been a couple of times in my own career when somebody has screwed up so bad that I wanted to kind of take back everything that I thought I was doing right. But I kind of thought, well, maybe I'll just look at this as an isolated event. I'll kind of learn from it and see what happens in the future. And if I've got to put some other controls in place to make sure that these things don't happen, then I'll do that. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Sound advice. Appreciate it.
Who else? Anybody else got anything?
I would say definitely having a few different unit leaders for my time when I was at Fleet Forces. I really appreciated the last one that I had when we went on a brass quintet tour and we were gone for many days. He was always talking about like, hey, if anything happens, if, gear gets messed up or something breaks, just come tell me, like, don't be afraid to, just communicate with me if something's going wrong so I can, provide that sweet, sweet top cover and just make sure that we are supported. So then when the PAO camera falls over and it breaks in the tour and I have to go tell him, I already feel more comfortable and I know like it's an accident. I didn't do it on purpose. And it definitely raised my anxiety and nervous levels, but I was really appreciative of the support and just that kind of preemptive conversation about trust before we left.
Okay, yeah, good. There was a couple years ago, we got a call to do a particular gig, and I guess the band would do this particular thing every year. And I was the new bandmaster here, so I was like, okay, I'm going to let me take a deeper look at this because something doesn't smell right about this. And it turned out it was a big fundraiser. And I'm like, yeah, no, we can't do it. But due diligence, I went to the staff judge advocate and said, hey, can you take a look at this? Because I'm not sure it's the right thing. He's like, oh yeah, no, you can't do this. All right, that's what I thought. So I went back to the sponsor and I said, I'm sorry because this is it's not legal for us to perform. Well, you've been doing it every year. I'm like, well, I'm the new bandmaster here. We've got a new staff judge advocate, and this is how we look at the law, and this is what the law says, what we can do and we can't do. And he's like, and just pushing back and pushing back. Well, let me talk to the judge advocate. Okay. So I sent him to the judge advocate, still same answer. And he comes back to me, he goes, well, I'm gonna have my admiral call your admiral. I'm like, okay, his name is Admiral Mike Bernanke. Here's his phone number, here's his email address. And then I get off the phone with him, I call my chief of staff and said, Captain, you're about to get an angry phone call, and this is why. He said, thanks, Pat, appreciate it. We got you covered. And that was it. I never heard anything else about it. But, again, it's like beating that bad news home. I wanted to make sure that they knew they were going to get an angry phone call. And all the chief of staff had to do was go over to the SJA and say, hey, tell me what's going on with this. And that was it, and he appreciated that because I'm covering for him as well. And, I had a very safe, that chief of staff at the time, actually the one I have now too is fantastic. But, at the time he was very much, yeah, whatever top cover you need, you just give me a buzz, let me know. And I really appreciated that. Anyone else? Professor Wang, you've been really quiet. And he's still being quiet.
Yes, sir.
What else you got? You guys got anything else? Any other questions, comments, discussion? Completely disagree with what I say, and that's fine. Please do. Please push back. Again, that rebuilding trust, and just building trust initially, but rebuilding, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. My wife is a marriage counselor, and she counsels couples sometimes that have those pretty serious breaks in trust. And one of the things that she tells them from the outset is this may not work. You may not ever be able to get back to a place of trust. But if you do, these are the things that you have to do to get there. And these are the things that you have to allow, some vulnerabilities you have to allow for yourself, and some patience that the other person has to allow as that person allows more and more vulnerability over time. And it's all about the relationships. Anybody else have anything? Oh, let me put up one last thing, and I'm going to share this. I'll share this in an email, but let me just do one last thing here. And these are obviously not in alphabetical order, but they're in the order that they showed up on my on the slides. If I were a real PhD, I would have put them in alphabetical order, but I'm just a DSL. Okay. All right.
How's that go, sir? It's just a DMA.
What's that?
How's that go, sir? It's just a DMA.
It's just a DMA. I'm just a DSL. I'm not a PhD. So
What's a
I don't have to
PhD between friends?
Yes. What are your thoughts on that, Professor Blosser?
Right.
I have many, sir. It's part of the reason why on most DMA, like when you get, I'm not sure what your like final comprehensives and to finish to get your degree program, mine was required. You had at least one person who had a PhD. So that way you had like someone that was more like kind of entrenched in that, you know, peer reviewed journal stuff. So they would call that person out who used maybe more self-help books and less research based things. Not that the self-help books aren't based on research, but you know.
Right. But they're not, you know, it's great because if you read like Simon Sinek or David Marquet, they've got like 10 pages in the back of the book of all of the research and references that they had. The difference is that they're not peer reviewed, right? They don't have a bank of PhDs or whoever kind of reading it over and going, yeah, I agree with that, or hey, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think that that's right, or whatever. So that's the only difference, really. And like Jim Collins is I think he's like a Harvard business professor, you know. So who's going to challenge him on something that he writes, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't know who Jim Collins is, he wrote Good to Great. It's one of the standards of business leadership kind of things. All right. Anybody else? Nope. All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining me on this. We'll do another one in a couple of weeks. I'm probably going to do, well, I was thinking about doing conflict resolution, but I think we've already done a lot of that between the building and rebuilding trust, between the empathetic listening. But I can do something targeted for conflict resolution. It'll be a lot of what we've already covered, really. I was thinking about doing maybe change management or ethics or something along those lines. But if you guys have something specific that you want me to cover, please let me know. If you got something, Carl reached out to me and said he's got something that he would like to actually lead. He'd actually like to lead one of these trainings. And so he's going to do that probably sometime next month. If any of you have something that you're really passionate about or leadership is concerned, maybe through experience or something like that, please let me know. I don't have to be the one that's talking all the time, even though it seems like it. Or like I said, if you have a topic that you'd like to see me present or that you would like to present, please shoot me an email or a text message and we'll look at it. All right. Thanks, folks. Have a great one.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, real quick. Just not for everybody else. Just I had questions about the technical aspect of how you're presenting. I just wanted